You don't expect danger to just show up at your door in the middle of the afternoon. But on May 19th of 2006, that's exactly what happened. A 26-year-old woman was home alone when someone she used to trust showed up uninvited. And minutes later, she stopped answering her phone. Hours later, her mother walked inside and found something no parent should ever see. No forced entry, no robbery, just a brutal, targeted attack. And the man responsible, he'd been planning it for years. Alexandra Marie Ducsay, known to most as Xandra or Zan, was born in Milford, Connecticut. She was the youngest of three and very much the baby of the family. Her two older brothers were fiercely protective of her, and despite the age difference, they were incredibly close. Xandra had a natural warmth about her, bright, outgoing, and the kind of person who made people feel comfortable almost instantly. And from a young age, she loved to perform. She would sing, dance, put on little shows for family and friends, anything to make people smile. But this wasn't just something she did for fun. It was something that she pursued. Xandra competed in dance competitions, and she stood out, not just because she was talented, but because she gave everything that she had to it. As she got older, that drive only intensified. She balanced part-time jobs with her passion, constantly pushing herself forward. After high school, she enrolled at Albertus Magnus College, where she graduated with strong grades before stepping into a more traditional career as a systems analyst at People's Bank, following in her father's footsteps. But Xandra was never someone who stayed in one lane. She was ambitious and constantly building towards something bigger. On top of her career, she earned her real estate license, adding yet another path to her future. And still, she never let go of performing. In fact, she leaned more into it. She became a professional dancer and along the way discovered she had a real talent for acting and singing too. Once she committed to something, she didn't hold back, and by this point in her life was full. She was working at a bank, teaching at a dance academy, traveling to New York for acting, singing, and dancing gigs, and actively working with an agent to break further into the entertainment industry. She was building something, a future that felt like it was just starting to take shape. But what people remembered most about Xandra wasn't just how driven she was, it was how much she cared. She was incredibly giving, someone who made time for others no matter how busy she was. She helped organize charity events, volunteered alongside friends, and worked to provide meals for people who needed them. It wasn't something she just talked about, it was just who she was. And somewhere in the middle of all this, she met someone. While working at People's Bank, Xandra met Matthew Pug, and almost immediately, the two fell hard for each other. Matthew was attentive, generous, and he showered her with gifts, even giving her a car at one point. For a while, everything seemed good, but over time, things started to shift, and Xandra's life was accelerating, and she was traveling, working, chasing opportunities, and trying to build something meaningful for herself. And slowly, there just wasn't any room left. Their relationship began to strain, and eventually the two went their separate ways in January of 2004. Around that same time, Xandra's parents were also going through a divorce. So in a short span, a lot in her life was changing, but she handled it the way she handled everything else. She just kept moving forward. She stayed focused, she kept working, and she kept building, believing that everything ahead of her was still hers to reach. She had no reason to think otherwise. And she also had no reason to believe that someone from her past wasn't done with her just yet. Two years following her breakup with Matthew, on May 19th of 2006, Alexandra and one of her friends had a busy day ahead. The two decided to catch up at the gym while working out, and this was around 10 a.m. Women worked out for an hour or so, and Xandra's friend left, but Xandra stuck back at the gym for a little bit longer. The plan was to go get her workout in, go home, take a shower, and then get to work, because she had important things and errands to run in the evening. Well, as 4 p.m. rolled around, Xandra's friend decided to give her a call, but was shocked when she didn't pick up. This was very odd. Xandra was always glued to her phone, and not in a bad way. She had to be, because of her work as a singer and aspiring actress. Her agent would call her at any time, so it was pretty common for Alexandra to always have her phone with her. Then, 30 minutes later, her mom, Linda, pulled up to her daughter's house, and right away she was on high alert. On the front porch was Xandra's dog. Now, it wasn't like she never let her dog out, but Xandra was nowhere to be seen. Her car was parked too, and the doors were unlocked, which was pretty bizarre. If anyone knew Xandra, they knew that she wouldn't just leave her doors open and her dog unattended like that. So something told Linda to go inside the house and investigate. What she would find would be most tragic. As Linda entered the house and called for her daughter, she got no response. She was already on edge, but something on the floor made her quite literally jump out of her skin. Alarming stains were marring the floors of the house. Linda couldn't comprehend what she was seeing. She was still somehow carrying on with her search, though, and in her mind, the only logical explanation was that maybe Xandra had fallen and hurt herself and she might need help. So Linda made her way to Xandra's bedroom, which was down in the basement, and as soon as the room came into her periphery, Linda knew that her eyes weren't playing tricks on her. She saw her daughter motionless on the floor. 26-year-old Alexandra Ducsay couldn't be saved. She'd lost her life in her own home, and the person who discovered her was her own mother. This is the kind of nightmare one can never erase from their memory. Well, the police were called immediately because this was no trip and fall incident. Someone had fatally attacked Alexandra, and now she was gone forever. All of her dreams, her ambitions, her life, everything came to a screeching and permanent halt. When the police arrived at the scene of the crime, they were equally as shocked. It was a targeted attack. Right off the bat, the authorities knew that the attacker had to be someone who had unadulterated rage and anger towards Alexandra. The police did manage to recover one of the murder weapons. And you heard me right, they recovered one of the murder weapons. Multiple things were used to drive Alexandra to her ill fate. One of the weapons was believed to be a trophy Alexandra had won, and at that moment, it was missing. It's eerie that the same trophy Alexandra posed with in pictures and that she won for her passion and talent would be the same thing, or at least one of the things, used to end her life. The police checked the rest of the house, including the bathroom, and they found evidence of a cleanup. The attacker had tried to get rid of evidence, but they were obviously in a hurry, and they left. But speaking of leaving, the front door was also checked, and it didn't show any signs of a break-in. The house seemed a mess. And for instance, Alexandra's clothes were strewn all over the floor, but nothing valuable was ever taken, so a robbery was ruled out from the beginning. The attacker was definitely someone who was either let in by Alexandra or knew how to gain access without getting caught. But then, a forensic team carried out some tests on her body. They didn't find anything incriminating besides a strand of hair, which was not long enough to be Alexandra's. But other than that, there was nothing to lead the police in the right direction. Well, the police needed answers, so they started with people closest to Alexandra, including her friends and family. And the first person they talked to was none other than Alexandra's best friend, Nicole, the same woman who'd met up with Alexandra right before she went missing. The police wanted information, even the slightest of clues that could lead to the solving of this inexplicable case. Judging by the attack on Alexandra, it was definitely someone who knew her and who had a personal vendetta against her. And with crimes like these, the first people the police are highly suspicious of are romantic partners. So what better way to get information on Alexandra's personal life than from her best friend? Well, Nicole told the police everything she knew. She told the police about Xandra and Matthew and their amicable breakup, and then she told the officers about her seeing a new guy. His name was Jason, and the two had met at Xandra's workplace and started a relationship. The relationship was relatively new, but the police needed to get in touch with this Jason guy and figure out where he was at the supposed time of Alexandra's attack and untimely passing. So Jason was called into the police station, and he seemed very nervous, as one always is when they're in a tense environment like this, just being surrounded by a bunch of police officers. According to Jason, he did talk to Alexandra the day that she was attacked, at around noon. So this was just a few hours before Nicole called Alexandra and she was not picking up her phone. According to Jason, he and Xandra were talking normally when she was interrupted by someone who rang her doorbell. She got up and then she realized it was her ex-boyfriend of 6 years, Matthew, who was standing outside. This was quite bizarre, and right away, Jason could sense that Alexandra didn't want to see him. On the phone, Jason heard Alexandra talking to Matthew, asking him why he was there and all of that. Then she told Jason that she would call him later and disconnected the call. At that point, Jason didn't hear anything alarming other than Alexandra's surprised demeanor towards Matthew's unexpected visit. For the police, things were falling into place. Nicole wasn't the last person to see or talk to Alexandra. She had talked to Jason, and now Matthew had shown up at her home uninvited. According to Jason's story, Matthew was the last person to see Alexandra alive. And then Jason told the police that he tried contacting Alexandra after the fact, and she did pick up 15 minutes after that first call, but a couple hours later, at about 4 p.m., Jason called her again, and this time, she wouldn't pick up her phone. The conversation with Jason opened up another possible lead in her case, and now the police were sure of two things. Alexandra's ex visited her, and tragically the attack took place somewhere between the time frame of 12:30 and 4:30. So the next thing the police had to do was to figure out Alexandra's relationship with Matthew. And it's safe to say that officers quickly found out that Matthew was no ideal man. He had a criminal record that led to him being thrown behind bars in 1998, and during this time, Xandra continued to be with Matthew, and the relationship progressed. But friends and family, and even Xandra, began noticing a shift in Matthew. He was very volatile and aggressive and would just flip a switch in a second. And he would be one person one moment and be fuming the next. And their relationship was described as on and off again by all the people closest to her. Well, the police managed to track Matthew down, who was now married and lived with his wife. He was working 2 jobs, and when asked by the police where he was at the time of Alexandra's attack, he told them that he had to take an early leave from work to visit a sick relative. The police broke the news about Alexandra's passing, and he looked confused. The police didn't have anything on him at the moment, so he was let go, but they still worked on collecting evidence. The first thing they did was talk to his employer. They needed to corroborate Matthew's version of events because he conveniently didn't have an alibi at the time of Alexandra's attack, and when he was supposedly out seeing this supposed sick relative. Well, according to Matthew's boss, he left work much earlier, and the times given by the boss and Matthew didn't line up. So the police knew that something was fishy. Matthew was likely lying to the police. On top of that, Alexandra's mom never even liked the guy. She was always concerned about her daughter being involved with a convicted criminal, and she just didn't approve of him. All of Matthew's blatant lies led to the police getting a search warrant for his house. And there, they didn't discover anything except one thing. It was a roll of duct tape. Now, I don't know if I mentioned this or not, but on Alexandra's body and face, fragments of duct tape were found. And lo and behold, the tape matched what was found at Matthew's house. But this was surprisingly not enough for the police to arrest him. They then turned to DNA evidence, and they did manage to find unidentified male DNA in Alexandra's house. But the sample wasn't enough to get a full profile or even a match. So at this point, the police were hitting one dead end after another. Now sure, they didn't trust Matthew or the words that came out of his mouth, but they needed concrete evidence or something like a confession to really seal the deal. So the police talked to Matthew's relatives, and his brother divulged something very disturbing. Not only was Matthew a very volatile boyfriend, but he was also very angry with Alexandra when she broke up with him while he was still in prison. Remember the car that Matthew had gifted Alexandra? Well, after that breakup, she didn't return any of the gifts that he gave her over the course of the relationship, and this really rubbed Matthew the wrong way. Now, I've got 2 points about this personally. First, why give such expensive gifts when you just expect them back or expect something in return? And second, you can return gifts to an ex after a breakup, why not? But there's a certain way to go about it. You can ask them to give everything back, you can do a million other things instead of just marinating in unchecked anger, which is already a disaster waiting to happen for a chronically angry person like Matthew. So when the police heard of this, combined with the fact that Alexandra had moved on and found somebody new, this now gave Matthew a motive. Matthew's brother also came forward, following a falling out with his brother, and that was when he gave the police some chilling information. See, as you already know, Matthew was not a stranger to crimes and doing some shady things, but he also dragged the people in his life down with him, and this time, it was his brother. Matthew and his brother were both involved in illegal substance trade and the associated crimes, and within no time, the two got arrested and thrown in jail, and that was that. When they were released in 2005 and 2006, Matthew jumped headfirst back into that world of crime, and this time he threw his brother under the bus by setting him up shortly after their respective release from prison. Now, we don't know what exactly happened, but it must have been something really bad because it led to a very serious rift between the two brothers, since Matthew had pretty much destroyed his brother's life at this point. So now, Matthew's brother decided to get back at him and spill everything to the police. And this was regarding Alexandra and Matthew's unhinged obsession with her following their breakup. Matthew was seemingly keeping tabs on Alexandra following the breakup, and he voiced his urge to seriously harm her. Need I remind you that Matthew was having these very dark thoughts about a woman he dated for 6 full years? That's enough time to build a pretty serious life together. These two were deeply committed, and then all of a sudden, he just turns on her, just like that. Well, things escalated really fast, and Matthew started to plot something harmful directed at Alexandra. According to Matthew's own brother, he wanted to make Alexandra's attack look like an accident, or maybe something random. But then, he found something out about Alexandra's new man, and this is what really set off something inside of him. He became even more aggressive and violent in his planning, and now he went from wanting to make Alexandra's attack look like an accident to taking it to the next level of intensity. The police didn't exactly eat this story up because they were questioning Matthew's brother's credibility. But then they hit the jackpot, which put Matthew in the vicinity of Alexandra's house during the time frame when she was thought to have been attacked. See, the police had already checked cell phone tower data, and initially, they didn't find anything incriminating. But when they double-checked, they found out that Matthew was in the Milford area before 12 p.m. The cell phone tower data showed that he left the area for a bit but then returned after 12 p.m., and his cell phone pinged off the same tower for over an hour. This corroborated Jason's version of events. Then the police also talked to neighbors, and they also remembered seeing a man in front of Alexandra's house with a car that matched Matthew's car to a T. Now, I know this might seem like this all started happening pretty quickly, but all of this evidence had been building back and forth, and finally having enough evidence to convict Matthew took 6 whole years. It wasn't until August of 2012 that Matthew was finally arrested for murdering his ex-girlfriend, Alexandra Ducsay. And as a reminder, Alexandra lost her life way back in 2006. I can't even imagine how grueling, long, and painful these 6 years must have been for her loved ones, especially her mom, who didn't like Matthew to begin with and always had a gut feeling that something was wrong. A mother's intuition and gut feeling are almost never wrong, and this case proves that. Well, in the end, catching Matthew was easy, and the police didn't have to look too hard, and that's because he was already in prison. And you'll be shocked, or maybe not, when you hear what he was in prison for. He was doing time for attacking a woman in 2008 with a firearm after trying to steal her purse. Matthew was ultimately charged with first-degree murder and breaking into Alexandra's home. It all started when he was in prison and Alexandra wanted out of their relationship. When he got wind of this, he began seriously threatening her, writing her deranged notes and being very violent verbally. It was so serious that it got to the point that Alexandra's mom had to involve the police because her daughter was so shaken up after these threats, and she wanted to be as far away from Matthew as possible. Following an investigation, Matthew was prohibited from ever contacting, reaching out to, or even writing to Alexandra ever again. This was a moment of peace for Alexandra, and she went on with her life. She was working at the bank, she was building her career as a singer, actress, and dancer, and she also had met someone new. Matthew was now ancient history, and Sandra truly believed that the police had dealt with him, and that he wouldn't be bothering her anymore. But she was very wrong. Sure, Matthew treaded gently and didn't reach out to Alexandra directly, but he kept it all in his mind. He kept thinking about and obsessing over her, how she left him, how she moved on with her life, and how she was now happy without him. It could have been about the money and the gifts too, but something potent like anger, hatred, and jealousy was at the forefront of Matthew's mind, because if you remember, nothing valuable was even taken from her home following her attack. This makes you think if Matthew was motivated by something else entirely, whether it was a case of teaching Alexandra a lesson, or if I can't have her, no one can. Well, Matthew on the surface seemed pretty unfazed following his release from prison after the breakup with Alexandra. He also moved on, got into a relationship, got married, and had a child, but as we all know from these cases, nothing is ever as it seems. But underneath Matthew's perfectly crafted life was the real deal, and it was truly dark. He was making a plan on how to get back at Alexandra, and this goes to show that the crime was also likely premeditated. He didn't just attack her out of the blue or on a whim. It was carefully planned, deliberate, and intense. He thought of everything beforehand. He stole the special duct tape from his workplace as well as gloves to carry out the attack. Matthew had thought long and hard to cover his tracks, and then it was finally that fateful day. Matthew knew what he was about to do, but tragically, Alexandra didn't have the slightest clue that her life was about to be turned upside down in such a drastic turn of events. She did not expect Matthew to be at her front door. Even though we don't know the full extent of the attack and how it played out or how it was carried out play by play, it's believed that a struggle ensued after Matthew forced his way into her home and ultimately ended her life. Alexandra put up a fight, but in the end, she was unsuccessful, and Matthew gained the upper hand. He was riding on a wave of jealousy and anger. He didn't want Alexandra to be happy. She was living her dream life. She had a stable job, and she loved what she was doing, and she was on her way to doing something big with a new man by her side. And Matthew didn't like that. So at the trial in February of 2015, everything was laid out. The prosecution questioned Matthew, who was still claiming to be innocent after all of this, but his stories soon got mixed up, and it's safe to say no one believed him even a bit. Then there was Matthew's brother's testimony against him, and that was the nail in the coffin. Matthew had a hand in driving Alexandra to her untimely end, and it was all needless and senseless. The jury deliberated for 3 days, and now it was time to read the verdict. Matthew Pugh was found guilty of all charges, and he was sentenced to 60 years in prison and given an additional 20 for breaking into Alexandra's house. Alexandra's family was there at the trial, as well as the sentencing, and their victim impact statements were heavy. They addressed the murderer very bravely and stressed how much his actions completely altered their lives and left an unfilled void in their lives forever. I just hope that Alexandra's loved ones are hanging in there and doing okay after all this time has passed. There's nothing in the world that could prepare you for something like this. Nothing. And for Alexandra's own mother to find out that the very man she tried to warn her daughter about was the one who took her life in the end? I can't even imagine. Betrayal is bad enough on its own, but this is something else.